So now looking at fiscal policy, and this is the first one of the presentations about government policies and how they can influence macroeconomic indicators, or whether they can or not even. Here we see the budget deficit, so it's the difference each year between tax income that the government receives, and the spending. And we can see most years are in a deficit because they're below this zero line. Except for here, John Major did quite well there, and beginning of Gordon Brown's career as treasurer as well. So we can see our deficit. You know, to be kind of fair to the Conservative Party, they have reduced the deficit. I don't know what it was in 2013, 2014, but they have reduced it. But every year that it's below the zero line, it's obviously adding to the debt, which is the cumulative total. But we'll go through those definitions a bit later on. So we've got to be able to define fiscal policy. We've got to be able to explain how it can affect unemployment, how it can affect inflation, how it can affect economic growth, how it can affect the current account position of balance payments, and discuss how effective it is in terms of achieving the government's macroeconomic objectives. Just before we do that, there are just two other specification areas that, if you're following the presentations in order, these won't have been covered. So they're just definitions. So income redistribution is just ensuring that everybody has access to basic necessities, and to correct what is seen as equitable, I'm having issues saying words today, distribution of income. So basically taxing richer earners and distributing that money to poorer earners to get a more fair distribution of income, or equitable distribution of income. And economic stability is the avoidance of significant fluctuations in the economy. So those fluctuations may be through real GDP or growth rates, unemployment, inflation, or the price level, or trade balances. So what does the government want to achieve? So the top four policy objectives are low or no unemployment. We would say low unemployment, don't necessarily aim for no unemployment. Inflation, we measured through CPI at 2 plus or minus 1%, or between 1 and 3%. We want high and positive economic growth. We want a satisfactory balanced payments position. We may aim for income redistribution as well, more equitable distribution of income. We want stability, and more, I've added this on the bottom, we might want sustainability, and by sustainability might mean sustainable economic growth. So we don't just want it to be as high as possible, we want it to be sustainable as well. So that's more looking at the increasing aggregate supply. So what policy instruments do we have to achieve all of these things? Well, we have demand-side policy instruments, so fiscal policy, which is taxation and government spending, and we have monetary policy, which is control of the interest rate and the supply of money, and as well exchange rate, although we don't intentionally control our exchange rate. And we have supply-side policies. There's loads of supply-side policies, but these are just a few of them. And we also have trade policies as well. So protectionism we can use if we really wanted to. There are other trade policies as well that come into in the A2 course, but I won't go over those because we're just focusing on AS for the moment. So if you read the textbook, pages 138 to 143, you'll get some information on fiscal policy. So fiscal policy is just the tax and spending decisions by the government. So reflationary, or sometimes called expansionary or loose fiscal policy, that's just a policy designed to increase aggregate demand, and you do that by increasing government spending and reducing taxation, or just doing one or the other. And deflationary or contractionary or tight fiscal policy is designed to reduce aggregate demand, so decreasing government spending or increasing taxation, or doing one or the other. So this is what it would look like. And we may have long-run effects as well, because we may affect investment in our economy. So it may kind of reflationary fiscal policy may increase aggregate supply as well in the long run, and it might decrease aggregate supply in the long run if you use deflationary fiscal policy. But what we need to know is what we need to do is to be able to explain, why does this happen? Why does that happen? Okay, so an increase in government spending, what happens? Well, AD and AS may increase, because government spending is a component of AD. So if you increase if you increase G, you increase AD. But C and I may also increase if benefits or grants increase as well. AS, if your spending's on education, it might increase your quality of labour, productivity of labour, and it might increase, if grants increase, or subsidies, it might increase the quantity of capital or quality of capital as well. If you decrease the tax rate, income tax, if you decrease that, you should increase consumer expenditure because people have more real disposable income to spend. If you decrease corporation tax, you should increase investment. And we know that if you increase investment, capital quality should increase on your AS curve. Decreases, so both of these things we're looking at reflationary fiscal policy. Both of these things down here are deflationary fiscal policy. So if you decrease government spending, opposite happens. Increase taxation, opposite to what up here happens. Okay, but there are actually two different types of fiscal policy. This becomes more important in the A2 course, but it is introduced in the AS. There's discretionary fiscal policy, which are deliberate changes by the government in government spending and taxation, and there's automatic stabilisers, which change automatically with fluctuations in economic activity, and these are meant to just take the kind of sharp edges off the economic cycle, but you'll learn more about that in the A2 course. But basically the way they work, if there's a boom, so this just basically means there's a large increase in real GDP, so you've got lots of economic growth, your automatic stabilisers kick in, and these are deflationary because you're paying more income tax and corporation tax if you're earning more, businesses are making more, and there's a fall in government spending because there's lots of people are employed in the economy and they're not having to pay out as many benefits. However, if there's a recession, so you've got a fall in real GDP, lots of people out of work, automatic reflationary stabilisers kick in, so there's an increase in government spending because they're spending more on benefits, and a fall in tax revenue because people are demanding less and purchasing less. But this is very much A2 based, so just having a general awareness is good, but that's probably all you need at this point. Okay, so looking at what the government spends their money on, this is a very small diagram at this point, but this is from the Guardian website. It's a bit out of date now, but have a look. They usually update these every year or every few years. You can see so many areas of what the government spend their money on. So a big amount of spending by the government in 2008/9. And then this is a nice picture as well, because this is showing government spending from this area. This is in 2012-2013. So did it change much to 620 to 680? So about £60 billion. Well, depends whether you think £60 billion is very much money. But here's all the spending and the different departments that they're spending it on. So we can see health and benefits are a big area, but not, it's not all like job seekers allowance, because if I go into this diagram here, here's the kind of the benefits, and actually it's mostly state pensions that take up most of that. So don't just think that's all those lazy people not working and getting job seekers allowance. It's not. It's state pensions that take up the biggest amount, and you've worked all your life. I agree that you're entitled to be kept warm and to be kept fed. Yeah, I agree with that. This area is all the money that's coming in, and unfortunately it doesn't cover all of the money that's going out, so we have a deficit, a fiscal deficit, remember, not a current account deficit. We do have one of those as well, but it's nothing to do with this part of the course. It's fiscal deficit, and so we have to borrow some money to fund that. So who decides on fiscal policy? Well, it's political. So here we have people holding up this briefcase. Every year I get asked the question, why does Gordon Brown have like a new one and the others have an old one? I think actually they've now introduced the new one, but I don't know, the Conservative Party. Oh, well, Alistair Darling had the old one there, doesn't he? But some people preferred the tradition of the old one. But fiscal policy is decided on by the government, and the Chancellor of the Exchequer announces the budget in April each year, and that's the budget for the next year. So it's their decisions on spending and taxation, but they only kick in the following year. When we have a budget deficit, it's just where government spending is larger than the tax revenue that they receive, and it's just measuring it in a year, whereas government debt is the total amount that the government owes. So it's the accumulated deficit, I suppose, and we have here an election campaign poster from David Cameron. This was not from this election, this was from 5 years ago for the previous election, 2010. And he says, we can't go on like this, I'll cut the deficit, not the NHS. And to be fair to him, if we go back to the first slide, he has actually cut the deficit, I believe. I don't know what it was for 2013, 2014. I should know that as an economic teacher. I can't remember it. I look up so much data all the time. I can't possibly be expected to hold it all in my head. But he's not actually, it doesn't mean he's cut the debt because that's just accumulated. So being under the zero line, as it were, it's just adding. So yeah, you've cut the deficit, but it doesn't mean we're like cutting the debt. We're still adding to the debt. Until we get into a surplus, we're not cutting the debt. But let's have a look at how fiscal policy can affect unemployment and growth. So if we increase government spending, the G in the AD equation increases. And if benefits and government grants increase, C&I will increase as well, and taxation, if we decrease that, C&I should increase as well, and that causes AD to increase, so that will cause growth in the economy as long as there's enough spare capacity, and to produce that extra output you need workers, so it should reduce unemployment. And this is showing it on a diagram there. And the benefits, obviously you're reducing unemployment, so hopefully increasing people's material living standards, and you're reducing the need to spend on unemployment benefits, and you increase tax revenue, hopefully. You should be able to spend those on, things that produce positive externalities and merit goods. But there are some side effects with all of these policies. So you do get a bit of inflation. Here we have a rise in the price level, so we've got inflation. So why is inflation bad? Well, you lose purchasing power, there's uncertainty, so it could affect investment in the future, and you get your loss of international competitiveness, so it might affect the X minus M. And it might actually cause, in the short run, if you use this policy, might cause a bit of a budget deficit and add to the government debt. Hopefully in the long run you won't get that because you increase your tax revenue and reduce unemployment benefits, but in the short run, when you're operating this policy, you might increase the deficit. Right, how would you control inflation? Well, you need to know which type of inflation you're looking at, demand pull or cost push. So if you want to control demand pull inflation, you decrease government spending, and you'd increase taxation. So this should reduce AD, or you probably wouldn't want to reduce it fully, you just want to slow down the growth of it, and that should reduce demand pull inflation. As we can see, we've got falling price level, okay. But it also reduces real GDP and might increase unemployment, so probably won't make people happier because people will be out of work, and that would have a serious effect on their material living standards and their happiness. But however, if it's cost push inflation you're looking at, so this is, remember, inflation caused by the costs of production increasing across the economy, you might want to restrict public sector wage increases. Now, you won't be able to restrict private sector, and the private sector is bigger than the public sector in this country, but it might set a sort of benchmark, a sort of standard, and you might offer more subsidies to firms in order to help lower their costs, but that would be very expensive. And taxation, like corporation tax, VAT, you might want to decrease that as well, so it reduces firms' costs and can increase short-run aggregate supply. However, general policies, general problems with fiscal policy, There's a time lag between recognising the need to change fiscal policies, being able to draw up the plans, and then implementing those changes. Also, some forms of government spending are quite inflexible, so it's not going to be, because it's controlled by the government, it's not going to be politically very popular if you cut spending on healthcare or education, because they're seen as pretty essential. You also need to base your fiscal policy on accurate data, so you need accurate data about what the economy is doing and whether you should be trying to stimulate it or calm it down or cool it down. And you might have to wait quite a while, so hence the time lag. But you want to be confident in the, if you do think your economy needs to be stimulated or reflated, that actually the data is accurate. And there may also be unintended consequences, so adverse consequences. So if you raise income tax or increase benefits, this might actually reduce the incentive to work. So you might increase unemployment, not maybe because you've kind of reduced or slowed down the growth of aggregate demand, but just because there's less of an incentive to work. So you wouldn't really want to cause that and do that. So looking at the type of question that you get on, they usually don't ask you a question on the whole of fiscal policy. They usually break it down. So discuss whether an increase in government spending on education will always increase a country's growth rate. So it's got a specific factor, variable, that it wants you to look at, and it's looking at government spending on education. So it's fiscal policy. It could also be considered supply side policy as well. But you can have a look at that in the supply side policy presentation. Okay, so pretty much covered all of those factors except for how fiscal policies affect the current account position of the balance of payments. It's a little bit more complex with fiscal policies, but the way really they're probably likely to affect them is, maybe if you have grants and subsidies, it makes your products a little bit more competitive because it might lower the price of them because it's lowering the cost of production, and it might help make your products, help make your business more productive if the grants for investing in new technology. So that could help your current account position in terms of your net exports. And taxation, maybe if you lower the rates of taxation, that might lower your cost of production as well. So it does affect it, but I'd say monetary policy, supply side policies affect it a little bit more. But when you're doing your revision notes, think about how fiscal policy can affect the value of exports and the value of imports.